Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Triangulation is brought to you by Cashfly at CACHEFLY.com. This is Triangulation, episode 257, recorded Monday, July 18th, 2016. Virginia Heffernan. Triangulation is brought to you by Corning. Corning's incredibly durable Thunderbolt and USB 3.0 optical cables are longer, thinner, lighter, and stronger. Go to corning.com/twit to save up to $130 on their superior Thunderbolt optical cables. It's time for Triangulation, the show where we get together with some of the best minds in technology, and I always look forward to this show because I learn something every single time. We call it Triangulation because it's me and our guest and you in our chat room at irc.twit.tv. So if you can watch live, give us your feedback. Let us know what you'd like to know from our guest. That would be great. Our guest today has a lot to say about the internet. I've known Virginia Heffernan's name ever since she reviewed Twit in the very earliest days as a media reporter at the New York Times, where she still covers media. In fact, we're stealing her away from her job today because she's supposed to be watching the GOP convention and reporting on it from the New York Times. She has written a brand new book that is called Magic and Loss, The Internet as Art. Gwyneth Paltrow says, Virginia Heffernan is one of the writers I most admire. Hi, Virginia. Nice to have you.
Hi there. Hi.
Wow. Are you like buddies?
From you. Yep. Gwyneth and I are buddies.
Nice. She lives in Brooklyn, right?
I don't know where she lives, and we are not buddies. That came out of nowhere. I don't know what that means exactly. But yes, I live in Brooklyn, and I promise not to speak about its many glories because I feel like Brooklyn has tooted its own horn, played its own loud ukulele for the world to hear too long. But I've lived here a long time, so that's my excuse.
Well, I'm a fan of your work, and I have to confess I haven't read this yet. And I also confess that when I thought the internet as art seemed a little odd. First of all, what do you mean by art, and how do you make the internet art?
Well, both the word internet and the word art are up for grabs, and that's what I liked about it. I mean, I issue some very non-scientific statements in the book. So there's nothing in it. I decided that I wanted provocations in the book, right? Yeah. I wanted you to ask yourself, I wanted us to interrogate our own experience of this phenomenon, the internet, that's, barreling along. And mostly the notes that we make on it are, I hate myself for loving this, or I hate myself for using this. And I wanted to make a different kind of note. And I wanted us to slow down a little bit and try to see what's happening here. So I break in the book, and this is somewhat arbitrary, I use, as you know, you've teased me about, I have a somewhat classical education. I can't fully say it's classical. My father points out that my Latin is terrible.
Hey, the fact that you have Latin to be terrible is pretty good.
That a person has Latin is also old-fashioned.
Yeah.
But no, my emoji is much better than my Latin.
Well, emojis don't have declensions and conjugations, so it's much easier.
Oh my God, those are so hard.
Yeah.
So I break the book into 5 sections that designate the arts as we sort of inherit from ancient Greece. I just figured that the internet is so oceanic, it's so gigantic that there's no way not to map it onto some of the great civilizations of the past. It would be silly to compare it just to network television or just to another corporation. Like comparing Google to Procter & Gamble makes no sense to me. So comparing it to ancient Greece, I break it down. I'm looking to remind myself into design. So that's something like architecture in the ancient world. Text, which would be poetry, plays. Images, which would be later frescoes, but all kinds of two-dimensional images. Video. Now, there wasn't as much exposure to YouTube as you might imagine in Athens in the BC years. But yeah, it's something Google just didn't penetrate backward in time the way it should have. But video captures for me performance and a certain kind of athleticism that were part of the arts in ancient Greece, and then music. And what it does with each of these kinds of, elements of experience, each of these collections of artifacts, is clock the magic that they've brought to the world, which is a term I get from engineering, and the loss that they've visited on us, the feeling of grieving. And for that one, I pay a special attention to the compression technology that, in music, the MP3 compression that
lossy compression, I must point out.
That's right. Lossy compression. That's where I get the word loss. What is lost in that compression? I spend a long time talking to and reading about vinyl fanatics, live music fanatics.
They say the emotion is actually extracted when you extract those little bits from music.
Some people call whatever that thing that's lost. And technically what might be lost is some of the blurriness of the bass. It could be something as simple as that, or people just love that hairy sound of the needle on the record, associate it with nostalgia. But in any case, they tend to denigrate the MP3 experience, even though, of course, we all listen to compressed music like that. As sorry about the beeps here, but I'm not winning getting them out. But in any case, so that's the loss. So what I'm taking the measure of that kind of grieving that you hear from everyone, not just from hipsters who have flip phones now and take whole years off from Facebook to do Eat, Pray, Love or whatever, and not just from grandparents who are like, we never sit down and have conversations anymore. Yeah. They're always texting. Because though I feel both of those impulses, I also think that, on some level, we all feel that maybe in a more minor way. It's interesting to hear about what people miss from analog days.
Although the irony of, nostalgia on the internet is it kind of boils down to things like, you remember Flappy Bird? Weren't those great times?
Right, but that's 6 months ago. That yeah, remember all the poetry around Pokemon Go? I'm so sad that's gone.
Yeah, it's only a few weeks away that right? Pokemon Go nostalgia is just any minute now.
Just weeks away. But yes, but nostalgia on the internet actually has played. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about the internet, that really proto-internet of the 70s and early 80s.
Well, I want to mention that because I think people sometimes will say, "Oh, well, she's Ari Wiest. She's brand new to the internet." But no, in fact, you've been on the internet longer than I have. You started in the mid '80s on an ARPANET called Eve. I mean,
it was the late 70s, actually. Yeah.
So it's not like you're some Johnny-come-lately. You've been involved with technology from the very earliest days.
Yeah, I do see myself, in good ways and bad, as a digital native. So, and I'm 46. I'm a little old to be a digital native, but
well, not if you start in the 70s. At 8 years old,
a millennial recently called me a mother of the internet, where I was like, wait a second here.
Are you sure that's what she was thinking?
Yeah, exactly. But in any case, I was nine years old. The colonial town where I grew up in, Hanover, New Hampshire, had Dartmouth College in it. Dartmouth got a new president. President John Kemeny had written the language BASIC. I think he had no idea what he was doing in our ski town with its back to the land stuff, like snowshoeing to work. And he just wanted to be back at Princeton, probably working for Einstein as he had, and having access to all these computers. Anyway, to remedy that, he had a giant mainframe, those rhinoceros computers that snort and stampede and have to be kept behind bulletproof glass. He had one of those installed right on this colonial campus. In exchange, as I understand it, for the real estate, he agreed to teach the local school children BASIC.
Oh, wow.
With the
wait a minute, John Kemeny taught you BASIC?
That's right, learning it from Kemeny. I mean, by the way, you are the only person in the world impressed by this, and thank you for being impressed by it.
I'm blown away.
I tried that out as an opening line on people, and they just are like, yeah, who cares? But anyway, John Kemeny himself, one of the co-authors of two co-authors of
Kemeny and
BASIC.
Kurtz, yeah.
Gave a lecture in an auditorium. He drew, first time I saw a crossed zero with a little line through it. He did a quick, simple program for us.
Wow.
We wrote it. We saw it come out on, paper with frills or whatever the things on the side, dot matrix. And I was hooked. 4 of the other kids, all boys, were hooked. The rest of people filed out, scratching their heads. And I wanted, as soon as possible, to get over that mainframe and figure out, where in the universe all this potential was. I wanted to locate it. And then later, when I persuaded my parents that if they ever cared about me working for NASA, highest ambition of mankind, of course, in 10 years after the moon landing, they needed to get me a Zenith Z19 dumb terminal
yes,
so I could
did.
dial in to that mainframe, and they did.
We aren't talking a Commodore PET. We're talking a terminal. So you could timeshare with the Dartmouth mainframe.
That's exactly right. That's
Wow.
exactly right.
And they did.
And yes. So I turned 10, 11, 12 on the computer, as we called it. And I just did not want to get off that thing. So I used our one telephone line, let's say 603-555-5555, because it's still my parents' line, crashed that thing into the modem.
You knew that gesture. You knew what I was doing there.
Yes, exactly. And the way you fit it in was so satisfying, wasn't it?
Suction cups.
It's like getting in a kayak.
Rubber. Yeah.
Yeah. Rubber. Yep. And then I heard, you'd hear the yes. Oh, you do well with the second drop.
Well,
tone.
I do. My impression is actually of a 56K modem because I had the bang, bang. So it's really not of that era. You're doing a 300 baud modem.
Yeah. What are you, Joy Bubble? What are you, like a phone freak over there? Let's do some free long distance calls while you're at it, Mr. Tone.
I can whistle 2600 hertz, but that's the story for another day.
Cool.
Captain Crunch has been on this show twice now, so I just want you to know.
As these techie listeners, viewers probably know, early computing and Jobs and Wozniak were super into gaming telephony.
Yeah.
And getting free long-distance calls.
Yep.
If my parents wanted to work for NASA, a lot of early hackers wanted free long-distance calls.
That was really the source of a lot of hacking was phone phreaking. That was early hacking, yeah.
That's right. And we're talking PHREAK phreaking.
Oh, yes, we are. Oh, yeah. No, but see, this is making me sad because the story you tell is in many respects the same story Bill Gates tells, Woz tells, Jobs tells. But as boys, they were able to continue on and do this. And I wonder, did at some point were you told, oh, you're a girl, this isn't your domain?
I love to cry misogyny at anything. Someone likes somebody else better than me, and I'm just like, misogyny, that's it. I mean, I'll say if I don't get a good deal on something, misogyny.
Yeah.
But I think that's not what happened, or at least I'm trying to make a virtue of what really happened. So 4 boys at that Kemeny lecture also went over to the mainframe, and they went on to learn Fortran and Pascal.
Yeah.
Right? They started with BASIC, and then they learned 2 other very sophisticated and very difficult computer languages. It's true that I didn't learn to code, and that was like 2 roads diverged. I got on the computer, I dialed into the computer, and I wanted to play games, right? So some people start using computers for productivity purposes, for accounting. Some people start using them for, work, for like to learn SEO or dark arts of selling something or e-commerce. I went on to play games, right? And the game I wanted to play was this fantasy adventure game like Dungeons and Dragons called Excalibur. Mm-hmm. Excalibur had a subset called Conference XYZ. And Conference XYZ was essentially a chat room with a few fantasy elements. So there was like masters and they could kick people off.
It was a MUD.
It was surprisingly clean.
Was it a MUD?
It was no, or at least they didn't use the word MUD. You're talking MUDD.
Multi-user dungeon is what they called them. And they were really chat rooms.
Yes, it might have borne some resemblance to it. It was sort of sui generis. And it
was a proto-MUD. We'll call it a proto-MUD.
So what's that?
Proto-MUD.
Proto-MUD. Maybe it was a proto-MUD, yes. Now that I think of it, it might have had some elements like that. I my name, so we took handles, and we were talking about this earlier, the taking of handles and names, which is part of, I think, what makes people feel anxious about the internet, the possibility for masquerade.
Right.
Is as old as the internet itself, and it's as old as networks themselves. Shortwave people, ham radio people, many of whom were washing up on the early networks in those days, which the people who could dial into the Dartmouth time-sharing thing included the U.S. Merchant Marines Academy, Bates College, local townies like me, children, probably shouldn't have been there. And so we made up our names. We'd also been doing it in Dungeons and Dragons. And my name was Athena because when you're, a 9, 10-year-old chubby little kid, of course you need a name that connotes wisdom and warlike skills. There was warnings at the time, I don't know if you remember this, but that kids had actually disappeared into Dungeons and Dragons. They had decided that they really were a cleric and a high priestess, and that's how they wanted to live. So when people started to worry that that I would be too drawn into this world, it just didn't seem possible. I had a pretty clear idea that I wasn't Athena and Athena wasn't me. And that sense of the difference, that I was creating a character when I was creating Athena, carried me through social networking now. So I think one of the things this book exists to do is show how the authors of digital culture, and I include billions of us who use the internet in all different ways, the authors of digital culture are aware of themselves on some level as authors. So to the extent that they see themselves appear online, they see a representation of themselves appearing online. It's amazing. I've had a couple of bad days on Twitter. I'm sure you have too, where your name gets bashed around, your little handle gets bashed around. I see that as my proxy, my alter ego, Page 88, which is my name now. I just decided Athena wasn't quite the way to go at my age. And I let her take sniper fire for me. The real me is safe.
That's probably where I made my mistake, having a handle on Twitter of Leo Laporte.
You went for Leo Laporte. Wow, you really went far for that one.
It's funny. I never had a handle. I've always been my real name.
I went on Twitter. You were early with that. I went on Twitter before we were supposed to be at the Times, before we were supposed to call ourselves, before we were supposed to be counted and be name, rank, and serial number writing for the New York Times. I thought it was more like eBay or something.
Right.
I was supposed to use a code name. I mean, your eBay name, I doubt, is Leo Laporte.
It is. But I think you were...
Your eBay name? No.
Actually, I couldn't get Leo Laporte, so it's the Leo Laporte, which is far worse.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know. I might have an ego issue.
The real Donald Trump. I think that definite article is a problem.
Mm-hmm. I could be a Leo Laporte, but that's kind of, I don't know.
Just another?
Yeah, just another Leo Laporte. That's it. Handles is a very interesting thing, and I think you got the culture of Twitter better than those. I was on Twitter very early on, and I could have actually early enough that I could have been at Leo, but I guess I had a different goal, which was to be reachable, to be findable, and so I wanted people to. So I use at Leo Laporte or something like that almost everywhere. If I can, if it's not.
I thought it was like a disreputable demimonde where you didn't really want to be seen.
You were right. You were right.
Well,
let's be clear.
What's weird about it is it's both. It's that demimonde where you see rakes and pimps and rabble, and then you also get news. So
in fact, many people have more than one handle. They might have an Athena, a Page 88, and a Virginia Heffernan.
Well, see, that is actually what I encourage. And, it's interesting because sometimes you talk about the internet to a group and people, adults feel, okay, they get it for themselves, but they're terrified for their children, especially, what are our kids doing on social media? There's so much bullying and so forth. I really, really counsel people not to take an abstinence model of internet use. In other words,
that would be a big mistake, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Right? So in other words, first of all, they should stay off the internet till a certain age, or it's like a true love waits movement.
Look at you. You're a mom. How old's your son?
I would ask him, except he's playing Pokemon Go right now.
Of course,
out on the
who
street.
isn't? Yeah.
He is almost 11.
Okay, so
and my daughter is 7, almost 7.
So you're dealing exactly with this.
Yeah, I'm dealing exactly with this.
And what do you do?
What I they have differing interests in digital culture. They have like parts of it they like and parts of it they don't. My son loves games. My daughter less so. She likes streaming video. But you know what she loves about streaming video in part with Netflix is creating, she does this with the Wii too, creating her character, Even with Netflix, you choose a name for your separate kids account.
Right.
And so she spends a lot of time sweating over which picture she's going to use for it to go up there and what name it's going to have. Now, see, I like that.
You identify with it. That's what you did.
I identify with it, the Athena thing. But also, watching my son take a picture for Google, if he has Gmail, taking a picture to look is cool. He went like this in it. He's got like his hands back like an executive. Yep. He's 11 and you're not going to mess with him.
I still do that.
But what I think that parents should do, and it's so simple, is just work with their kids to create an authoritative and authentic avatar. So it's not like you can only use it for 15 minutes. It's, do you want to be the kind of kid that puts up a lot of selfies? That's an option, and self-portraiture has got a long tradition, and here's how it goes. Do you want to be the kind of kid that like trumpets his own achievements all over the place? Do you want to mix it up on Twitter with actual classmates, about other classmates? You would teach a kid how to act in social space. You would tell them, I remember my mother telling me, if you see another friend who didn't get invited to a party you went to, you don't tell them the party sucked. Because they weren't invited to it. That was something I did, and I remember I got off the phone and she was like, that's disingenuous and you don't do that. Learning little rules like that was learning growing up, right? Teach your kids not to, in digital space, you teach them not to make reply all mistakes, right? You teach them, talk them through whether they're going to be an all lowercase kind of person or whether their little emoticon is going to have a nose, Those are the decisions that as authors of their online personas, they have to be making in a confident way, proactive way, or else those decisions are made for them. Their Facebook wall or their Twitter handle is overwritten by other people, And also those are the things that kids want help, decisions they want help making, It's like teaching someone how to stand not too close and not too far from someone they're talking to, or in the old days, how to ask for a friend on the phone. Remember, you were always told you have to identify yourself.
Right.
This is Virginia calling. May I speak to Greta?
Right. But parents abrogate that responsibility now, mostly because they don't know.
They don't know.
They go, I don't know what your avatar should look like. Compy386 in the chat room says, what a great mom, teaching her kids not to avoid the reality, but face it mindfully and with questions. I think that's true.
Mindfully with questions and, with a certain amount of confidence, because it's like telling your kids just to avoid parties. You're nervous about them.
Good point.
They should never go to a school dance.
Yeah.
Because something bad could happen, or they might meet someone, or you don't know, the music seems scary or whatever.
That's what we're telling our kids, aren't we? We're telling them, oh, it's too scary. Don't do that, because of our own anxiety.
Because of our own anxiety. But, we've got more skills than we know. For instance, everybody on the great retirement community that is Facebook knows about, whether you're going to be the kind of person that puts up that my father died yesterday, or whether you're the kind of person that only posts vacation shots and, that look good and, make it look like you've got it all together. And I think both of those are decent options. I'm glad that I am friends with some people who sell themselves constantly and some people who, are super vulnerable. But
make that choice consciously. Think of you're making a statement. Understand that you're making a statement.
Yep. Understand you're making a statement. You can learn from great writers of fiction. You can learn from terrific actors. You can learn from artists. And that's what I mean by art. That kind of conscious acceptance that you are working now in images, in video, in music on, say, SoundCloud, and in text to invent yourself and also your role in life in this great blue marble that is our new digital universe, this great galaxy that is our internet. We're
talking to Virginia Heffernan, her new book, which is really being widely praised by a lot of people, including Kevin Kelly, who was just on the show a few weeks ago and is absolutely one of our internet tour guides. He said, Heffernan is a new species of wizard able to perform literary magic upon supersonic technology. It's a joy and a revelation to be under her spell. And I'm kind of getting an idea what Kevin was talking about. This is the book available right now from Simon & Schuster, as Virginia said earlier, widely available on Amazon. You could have it with a push of a button on Amazon. There's also an audio book version. We're going to take a break and come back with more of Virginia Heffernan. Our show today brought to you by, we were talking before the show about fiber optics. Who makes glass? Who's the glass king? Who's the king of glass? Corning. They do the Gorilla Glass. They do most of the fiber optic cables that are out there. And they're not sitting still. They are innovating. You know, when we first got fiber cables in the studio, the engineers said, well, don't bend that. And whatever you do, don't step on that. Corning has new fiber optic cables. These are not your father's fiber optic cables. These cables you can bend, you can twist, you can step on, and they just keep on sending at a full rate. This is a really exciting innovation. These fiber optic cables are for Thunderbolt or USB 3.0. You might say, well, wait a minute, those aren't fiber optic technologies. Well, that's one of the things Corning innovated on. Right here at the top of the cable is something that turns the RF signal, the signal from the copper on the Thunderbolt, into light that is transmitted down the fiber optic cable and then translated at the other end. And it does this at full speed. Better yet, because these are fiber optic cables, they're thinner, they're lighter than regular copper cables, and you can go a whole lot longer. They have exceptional cable runs. You can go 200 feet, 60 meters for Thunderbolt, 165 feet or 50 meters for USB 3. There's a reason why you might want to do that. Those noisy, annoying, hot hard drives, get them out of your workspace. Put them somewhere else. If you're, for instance, if you're Universal Audio, they make those great Thunderbolt audio interfaces. When they're going to test them in their studio, they can't have noise in there, so they use optical cables by Corning to put the hard drives, to put the noisy stuff outside the studio and get true acoustic isolation. Hey, if it's good enough for Universal Audio, you got to try it. I use these because I have, most of my servers now and the computers are very quiet with solid state drives and everything, but I like big 4 terabyte spinning drives for my backup. I put those way far away. I don't hear them. I don't feel the vibration. I don't feel the heat. Instead of investing on multiple extenders or adapters or cables, turn to Corning. Establish the connection you need with one simple, long cable. 200 feet for Thunderbolt. Corning's cables, longer, thinner, lighter, and stronger. They take a bending and they keep on sending. Go to corning.com/twit and save up to $130 on Thunderbolt optical cables. This promotion is only valid till the end of the month, till July 31st, or while supplies last, so don't waste time. You can also get them, as you can see, lots of other places, including Amazon and B&H. But I would say go to corning.com/twit to save $130 right now. Fiber optic. I've made a mess of this fiber optic cable, but the good news is it doesn't matter. Fiber optic cables by Corning. We thank them so much for their support of Triangulation. Our guest, Virginia Heffernan, is the author of a brand new book. It's a challenging book, Magic, just the name, Magic and Lost, the Internet as Art. And I always think of art as a mirror, right? You look at a work of art and it tells you more about yourself than anything. Well, it tells you about the artist, but you also, what you see tells you a lot about yourself. And clearly that's what the internet is too. And you mentioned this at the very beginning, and it was pretty clear at the beginning of the internet that whatever medium, whatever bias you came to the internet with, you would reflect. So we in radio came to the internet and said, oh, it's a giant internet radio, worldwide radio. Publishers, magazine publishers said, oh, it's a magazine. Video people said, oh, it's TV. It's what is
Blind Man and the Elephant,
Blind Man and the Elephant. Yep.
Right. So we're all looking at it from these different perspectives. I will say, you say it's a challenging book, and that that is partly by design, not challenging just because I use pretentious language. Let's just get it out of the way. I told you my brand is going to be pretension and affectation. I can't help it. Some people are clear, plain talkers, and I like a lot of clauses and can barely, I postpone that period as long as possible. In any case,
I would be meretricious if I told you I was otherwise.
Well, good for you for knowing that word.
Yeah.
Leo, you're talking about the passage where my father tells me that my writing is a little glib, a little meretricious. And when I ask him what meretricious means, he says, "Oh, Virginia, meretrix, like a prostitute from your Latin. Did you learn nothing in Latin camp?" Or he did.
You went to Latin camp?
I mean, why not just call me a whore, Dad? Like, what's the whole roundabout thing? I did go to Latin camp. I got nothing out of it. He was right. So, but in the book, I do want to challenge readers to reflect on their own experience of the internet, because I love how collective it is. How collective is too small a word to describe something used. You probably know that there are as many. Sorry for the beeps again, but there are almost as many cell phone subscriptions in the world globally as there are people on the planet Earth. We are all in this together, folks, people, we're all in it together, and we should rise to it and ask ourselves what it means to us. All I could do was, talk about what it means to me and the people I interviewed and people I've talked to in years of covering tech. And what makes me happiest is when people push back on that. So you seeing the internet as an audio opportunity where I saw it as a game is, fascinating to me. I talked to John Perry Barlow, that lyricist for the Grateful Dead.
And the
he
man
saw
who
it
wrote
as a means of organizing deadheads.
And the man who wrote the Internet Manifesto and started it with People of Earth.
That's right.
Don't think I missed that echo there.
I love that era.
Yeah. Yeah, when we really thought we were the Clue Train Manifesto. Everything's going to change. But you know what? They were right. The problem is it's chaotic change. It's unpredictable change.
It's unpredictable change, but why is that a problem? Good change. That's what change is, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, one thing that, James Tate, the poet, said about art is that it moves you from one place to the other. It changes you, and good art does. If you don't want to be changed, you don't want to be moved to another place, go for lesser art that confirms your impression that, whatever, that Google's evil or that it's sad when someone dies. But if you want to risk changing, you need, harder, stronger poetry. And, I was just writing for the LA Times about Pokemon Go as a work of art. You may know some of the engineers behind it have absolutely classical training in composition, music composition and graphic art and visual art. And, one of the things I realized is it literally, Pokemon Go moves you from one place to the other. And surprise, when you risk being moved by something, a game, a work of art, you sometimes end up in dangerous places.
That's nice. That is nice. But you often end up somewhere new and exciting.
That's right. And I mean, look at us. We've let this thing blow us, like the 7 winds or whatever to this internet. And, here we are talking on Jetsons TV or whatever, the thing we thought would never come. We're like, you can actually see someone. This was the model for the future.
But that's why
for many of us growing up.
The word surfing, which nobody uses anymore, was really apt because you were, in fact, riding a chaotic wave that you really couldn't completely control. But those of us who survived and were dashed on the rocks surfed it.
That's right. I mean, it is, and it's actually, I think the threat of being dashed on the rocks is part of what's exciting to surfers. But the actual fact of being dashed on the rocks, let me say one more thing. I reviewed a really interesting book about Nancy Jo Sales' book, American Girls, I think is the name of it, about girls and social media. And, while I get that there's a great deal of psychic danger possible in the harassment of girls and boys online, including, having your head grafted onto the body of a lizard or a nude body that's not your own and having that disseminated and having your reputation impeached that way. When I was in high school, and I'm sure when you were too, the fear was of actual physical harm to the body with physical violence, with pregnancy, early pregnancy, unwanted pregnancies, and STDs, and in some cases lethal STDs, like AIDS. So, moving that to symbolic action, moving the aggressions that we visit on each other into symbolic aggressions and away from physical aggressions has been part of the civilizing effect of the internet.
Oh.
We keep trying to pretend the internet is coursening culture. It is not coarsening culture.
Really? You think this is civilizing? It's
on
the exact
Twitter.
opposite.
No.
Because it incites to action. I agree. I agree. Sticks and stones may break. Yeah, but it doesn't stop with the Twitter mob. It gives people permission. It gives them reinforcement. It lets them know that they and their hateful ideas and words are not alone, and encourages them, incites them to actual action. Isn't bullying a huge problem now? More than it was when we were in high school?
Monica Lewinsky's spoken out about bullying. I've been heavily bullied on the internet. I don't think that Monica Lewinsky had any physical damage done to her, which is not to say that it wasn't psychically destructive to have her name attached to all kinds of epithets. And I've had the worst day of my life seemingly the worst day of my life on Twitter, and yet emerged physically unscathed. You turn off.
You sound like Nietzsche. You said, that which does not kill me makes me stronger. I don't know if that's, it didn't kill you, but it might have put a hole in your brain.
I don't know that it makes me physically stronger because, it's not like I'm doing CrossFit or something, but I think it makes my vocabulary and my avatar stronger by exposing me to, and by the way, I am conscious that this might be a defense mechanism. I've lived on the internet for a long time. I could be one of those street kids who's trying to pretend I'm getting grit every time I'm shoved to the ground.
It's okay, Dad. I can take it.
Yeah, it's great. Exactly. I have a little traumatic brain injury, but I'll go on. But
I'm okay. I'm okay.
My TBI, I'm fine. But what happens on Twitter is it's more like your immune system is being subjected to different microbes. We keep saying Joey Ito, who runs the media lab at MIT, says
he's great.
It's so great. And he said, it's the microbes that are in charge of our bodies. We're like Mubarak. He said we only think we're in charge.
Right.
It's the microbes running the show.
Yeah.
And I sort of think that, you have this rational view of what your life might be like in social media or on the internet or your regular life outside it. But in fact, you're constantly, subjecting yourself to different idiom sets on the internet. I mean, this may be, Leo, I may be pushing something too far, but
I think you're nuts.
Okay, well, let me bring it home.
I am challenged. I am challenged.
I know you've been criticized. We've both been criticized. So let's say you've been criticized for a particular way of talking to and about women. That's okay. Anything's anything. I was criticized for talking to and about religion in the wrong way. So you learn, though, from the pushback on those things that you said.
I agree. There's a lesson to be learned, but there's a difference. You wrote that piece. You wrote that piece, but there's character assassination. Bullying is not necessarily based on factual material.
That's right, but
I think there's highly traumatic things that happen to people all the time on the internet. I think people kill themselves over things that happen on the internet. Maybe they shouldn't. Right. You could say they shouldn't, but they do.
It's not that I think that language has no power. I'm a writer. I absolutely believe in the power of the printed word. And, the chapter on text talks about how tweets are extremely powerful language. My only point in bringing up the movement from, actual physical violence to symbolic violence or to the abstraction of social media. So it means we're putting it into symbols, right? Pixels. That move is one that is a civilizing move. It's the way that animal sacrifice moved to prayer in early Judaism, that no longer were we slaughtering an animal, we were saying certain kinds of words to God. Or with money. I wrote about finance in graduate school. Money starts as gold. It's very difficult to mine gold. It's costly. It's painful to the people who do it. Gold gets inscribed with it as ingots, then moves to coins, then moves to paper dollars, and finally to the abstractions of credit card pulses or whatever they are, PayPal, Bitcoin. And these are civilizing moves that instead of the like barbaric doing it all with our fists, doing it all with the land, doing it all with our natural resources, we move into an increasingly literate society. I do not mean that that society doesn't come with a lot of pain. That's what the word loss is in the chapter, in the book. But I do mean that there is something to respect in this evolution.
Well, it's clearly an evolution. I think that where I would disagree with you is that the bits are somehow safely abstracted from the original reality. Unfortunately, it's a two-way. It's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street, and we're about to face an election that is highly influenced by social media. You could clearly make the claim. You could make a very strong claim that Donald Trump exists because he was able to so effectively use modern media in a very persuasive way, and to tap into a very powerful, current in American culture that is now awakened and will have an absolute physical impact on our culture, whether he gets elected or not.
So let's say that the construction of Donald Trump, first on The Apprentice, or maybe in the book co-written with or ghostwritten by my friend Tony Schwartz, The Art of the Deal. Tony's in the New Yorker
Tony.
this week.
Oh,
I know
yeah.
Tony.
Yeah.
I worked with him on a different ghostwritten book.
He's stepping forward now a little bit.
He's wonderful to talk about, how much Donald Trump has claimed authorship for that book, which Tony wrote, out of whole cloth. In any case, so let's say that Donald Trump is a construction of, some of his own preening, coupled with Tony's work on that book. Then I'm skipping steps with The Apprentice, where, Mark Burnett builds him a platform and a character
made for this time, yeah.
And then through Twitter. So let's just say that then that persona gets elected president and he builds a wall that ruins lives, right? That wrecks lives, like literally gets people killed. That is exactly what you're describing. I get that. But that's partly because people may begin to make the mistake that I want to warn against, which is that reality television is actually highly ritualized and aestheticized. And if we thought reality television was super scripted, passing as reality, nothing is more like that than Twitter. Writing in 140 characters, using very, very elaborate. I mean, I don't think any sonneteer, writer of complicated villanelles would have been able to master Twitter at a glance. Like it, to tag the proper people, to start with a period if you're tagging someone that you don't, that isn't also followed by your followers, and all the other conventions of Twitter and the possibility of making mistakes. Trump did master that. He does pirouettes on Twitter. He does triple axels on Twitter, even before he was wanted to be president. On the other hand, that is not the person that would sit in the Oval Office. That is something called @RealDonaldTrump, and it is a confection and an invention of a certain kind of pop art.
Well, all public personas are confections. That's of course true. My point is not that, in fact, I'm not even saying getting elected is the bigger danger here. My point is that the speech that occurs on Twitter activates, is a catalyst to actual violence.
Well, we've had a lot of violence at home in response to Obama's very cool presidency.
I guess the question is, are we, and I'm not sure what the answer is, something's going on in the last, few years, and it seems to be coming to a crescendo in the last few weeks. Is it because we are, thanks to new media, almost viscerally attached to the events of the world in a way we weren't before? Or is it the events of the world are in fact heating up? And I'm not sure which it is. It may just be we know about it. It's always been like this. But it strikes me that these new forms of media are stimulus to some of the worst impulses of mankind.
Well, certainly the most, limbic and id-driven impulses.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but at the same time, I think that, forever, those on the left said we needed to hear voices from the margins. That was a great expression in the 90s.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't have.
Now we hear from
deafeningly from those margins.
Yeah.
And and we don't like a lot of what we hear.
Right.
On the right, they hate, pushback from. I mean, the person who should have the highest trigger warning right now on Twitter is Donald Trump. I mean, that guy is like set off by a feather. You say anything against him and he wants to ban you from everything. I mean, that's the person I think needs a thick skin. That's the person who, needs to welcome a little more pushback on his ideas and actual conversation about them. In any case, the right is super sensitive to a lot of language. The left is super sensitive to a lot of language. And forget the sides. We all have these idiom sets that are, precious to us. And we only grow at great, after taking a real risk and owning authorship of our online personalities. And that's what that's what I counsel people to take ownership of. One thing I talk about is I'm not a master of this. I mentioned, probably out of turn, that you've been criticized for a certain way of talking about it to women. I have gotten in trouble twice for one time quoting a tweet in an article that had a word that I didn't realize had racist implications.
Oh yeah, we have hair triggers on that, and there's a lot of gotcha stuff.
Okay, there's a lot of gotcha stuff, but once I let my ego cool off on that and I stop being defensive, as Donald Trump was about using the Jewish star, I have to say thank you for teaching me that. Right. It's literally like using a word you don't really know, trying to pass it off. I heard my son say the other day, instead of smidgen, like I want a smidgen of this, he said, I want a curmudgeon of this. And,
it's a good word.
You don't let that go uncorrected. He meant smidgen, right? So I am glad that Twitter, even though I hated it when it was happening, and I felt like, oh, they were telling me I'm a bad person and now I have to defend myself. No, I just didn't know. I wasn't keeping up with it. Thank you for the lesson.
Well,
the other day,
I'm glad you found a nugget of education in it, but I think there's no question that Twitter has a mob mentality, is an outrage engine. There's some real. By the way, you're right. There's many Twitters. I'm talking about one particular thread of Twitter, but it is absolutely. I'm glad you could find some value in it, but it's absolutely clear that many, far from finding value in it, find it damaging. If you're Robin Williams' daughter, there was no education to be achieved in the vile vituperation she received on Twitter, right?
I mean,
for her to say, "Oh well, I learned something," it's not appropriate.
It goes both ways. So I was on a panel not long ago with Nick Denton of the, endangered, if not defunct, Gawker, and we were talking about gossip, and he was talking about the decision. And I don't want to go back into the story, but it was one of the Kennedys, a notorious philanderer. His wife had committed suicide in the face of a possibility of their getting divorced. And he said he wanted, he was on the fence about whether he should have A, covered the philandering, and B, covered the suicide. What was he going to, what was Gawker's responsibility to this as, quote, gossip? It occurred to me, and I'm just guessing, but here was a woman being gaslighted at home because her illustrious husband was cheating on her and getting away with it because nobody was calling him on it.
Right.
And the same way Jackie Kennedy had that experience. And yet the press is being all, oh, we've got to be hands off on this. We can't be critical of this. Who knows what the dynamics of the marriage were, but there are plenty of people, and a lot of times people on the margins, black and brown people and women, who don't hear their story told, and who, because of the deference of the press, because the press is like, oh, this is an id matter, we can't touch this, end up making people feel insane because they don't see themselves represented. I mean, I think I am a populist at heart. I can't be otherwise. Yes, we've heard a lot of voices. We asked Twitter to, let 1,000 flowers bloom, hear all these voices we'd never heard before, and big surprise, we don't like a lot of them.
Right. Would you say the same? Kennedy is one thing, but would you say the same thing if it were your non-public figure neighbors down the street?
I think anti-gaslighting is a big thing that Facebook and Twitter have done for lots of populations.
But should that be done in public or by her friends and family and neighbors? Or should it be done in the public forum? It feels to me that I don't think Nick Denton has the responsibility to protect people from being gaslighted.
I mean, when you say the person has to be a public figure, you're using the old ethics of the how decisions are made at newspapers and on television, that they have to rise to a level of public interest, be notable in some way for things to be reported on like that, including suicide is something, you don't give a cause of death as suicide.
I know.
Unless it's, the person's in the news. I'm not sure that applies anymore. I don't know.
So we're all public figures.
Yeah, and
I'm not sure I like that either.
Well, come on, it's too late. That ship has sailed
I embraced
for you,
it. No. You know what? I embraced it, and I would not in any. I mean, I may not like it, but I understand that I embraced it, and I very consciously embraced it. But
I mean, it doesn't.
Joey
it doesn't
Delgado
like
next door did not embrace that. Why should his life or his wife's life be part of the public conversation? I don't understand that.
Well, let's put it the other way. So that, which by the way, you hear much more often, and this is why my book is much more magic than loss. Much, much more often, you see obituaries and elegies online for people we never would have heard about otherwise. So Michael Gilmore, the journalist who I admire tremendously, has suffered with cancer. He is
amazing story.
One of the people who's put his struggles on Facebook, and it has kindled this compassion among his friends, those who know him, I don't know him, and people who don't know him, about the way that he's put this to us. Other people just simply putting up a picture on Father's Day of their late father. I find this, a way of building community like nothing I've ever seen before.
I agree.
Way more often.
But that's their choice. Michael chose to do that. If he had chosen not to mention his cancer, that would be his choice too, right? It wouldn't be my job to say, well, let me tell you what's going on with Michael.
I think that's right. Although my point is that the magic, people do this about their children too, and who don't have a choice. The magic of the internet has been that it has made every life worth chronicling, every life. And that sometimes means the bad.
That's a good point.
I don't know why we owe it to certain people to keep their secrets, because often their secrets are damaging to other people in their lives.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I certainly, I just got out of an organization where I signed an NDA, and I am absolutely prohibited from talking about it. And yet, the actual demonstrable crime visited on some of the people who worked for it, is actionable and more than actionable. I mean, people should be in prison. And yet, because I'm a neophyte and not a San Francisco native, I didn't know what I was signing. And now I wish I could tell that story on their behalf.
Now you got me going. Politico? No. No, this is a great conversation, and you can see why this book is, why I use the word challenging. I think these are really important conversations that actually are not being, at least you're surfacing these interesting issues instead of what we really get most of the time is this knee-jerk, well, privacy is good, bullying is bad, and I think it's much, as you point out, much more nuanced than that.
It's also interesting because you're talking about verifiable claims that would be made by a journalist. And, when I mentioned this thing, and it's in the book, about an article I wrote for Yahoo News it talked about cosmology. And to some extent, it was anti-Darwinist, although, anyway, it was a tonal miscalculation is how I think of it. In any case, real journalists brought heat on me and said, talked about the argument, took the argument seriously, and often didn't like it. And that was painful in its own way to see colleagues of mine in the profession disagree with me so vehemently, and also, school me so vehemently. But I did get an understanding of the wires I had tripped that I hadn't exactly known I was tripping. So that was useful. But then the Twitter pushback were not verifiable or falsifiable claims. They were just things like #worse than ISIS. Not kidding. #worse than ISIS. And Leo, if you think you get it bad sometimes on Twitter, you have never had a #worse than ISIS.
No. In fact, there's no man on Twitter who could say he's had it as bad as most women on Twitter. So
yeah, but worse than ISIS is gender neutral.
Worse than ISIS is so over the top that I actually don't find that. That's just like, I mean, come on. That's so over the top that it's just like, yeah, that's a typical Twitter statement. That's hyperbole times 10.
That's right. But, anyone who had followed YouTube comments or, had hung around those like basement back office joints that we used to know, like MUDs, knew that this was disinhibiting. It's like a couple of drinks to get on Twitter. You are not,
right.
Your executive functioning can be compromised. And by the way, I am liberal with the blocking. There's nothing better than making someone disappear from your life when, you've had enough. You've learned all you can.
Yeah, but
they've been your teacher long enough.
You disappear. See, Twitter's of the opinion that should be sufficient. But you disappear them from your life, but they're still telling everybody else all these things that you're worse than ISIS, and everybody else sees it. So how is that? How is that a solution? That's sticking your head in the sand.
If they find factual problems with a piece I've written or something I've said,
you want to know those, and I want to know those. Absolutely.
Absolutely want to hear about it.
Of course.
But if they're saying worse than ISIS or clueless, but you see what I mean.
No.
The hypersensitivity and reactivity is exactly what I, just for my online persona, want to avoid.
I stopped blocking. I stopped blocking on Twitter because I felt like that's just hiding it from me. So then I think I blithely wander through life thinking, yeah, everything's fine. I mean, if what you say is you're learning from all this, stuff is, well, why block it? You should let the sewage fly.
Sometimes I do, and then I let it fly for a little while, and then it's like when you finish a math book. I was like, I got the lesson here. You believe that I am worse than ISIS. I got it.
I can put it away. Hey, this is a book you're all going to want to read. I can't wait to take it home tonight. I didn't get a chance to read it before our conversation, but now I know I have to read it. Magic and Loss, the Internet as Art, really doesn't communicate what this is about, but this is really a conversation about how this thing that we're all engaged in is changing us and provoking us and perhaps teaching us. And the author Virginia Heffernan has been our guest today, and it has been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
I'm so glad that we finally see each other pixel to pixel, and since that time years ago that I wrote about you.
Yeah. See? Whatever.
Yep.
See?
Magic of the internet.
See? Yeah, please come back. I think this has been great, and I only feel like we've scratched the surface. There's so much more to talk about. I'll tell you what, I'll read the book, and then you can come back. How about that?
Okay, take care.
Thank you. We do Triangulation every Monday, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1800 UTC. I hope you'll tune in and watch live and join us in the chat room. But if you can't, don't worry. All of our shows, including this one, available amazingly enough on the internet. Go to our website, twit.tv/TRI for this show, or subscribe in your favorite podcatcher or application. There are Twit apps on every platform, thanks to our very kind third-party fan developers who just wrote them for us. Thank you. And let's see, I think next week we're going to talk to the father of visual... No. Someday soon, the father of Visual Basic. Speaking of basic, I don't think Kemeny is still around, but that'd be fun to talk to him too. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Triangulation.